is Tuesday, July 12th, back here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schaub. With me, as always, is Jared Smola. And Jared, I am back home. It's early. I haven't even brushed my teeth yet. I had to scarf breakfast. I got some water so that I'm, somewhat intelligible on here. But it's a different thing. I know that we have done this one other time this early in the day, but we're certainly not usually on this early.
No, I'm still on coffee number 1, or I'm usually on coffee 3 by the time we record these. So we'll see how it goes.
I make sure to get the caffeine in early. I'm not a coffee fan, but I'm going to get my caffeine in early before the kids are up so I'm ready to face them. But we had to get this in early because we've got meetings with Draft Sharks later today. We've got lots coming up on the podcast. I mean, we're jumping right back into it. Not only are we continuing this divisional preview series, we got 2 of those coming this week, but we've also got interspersed on each side of them the beginning of our beat writer interview series. We've got Cameron DeSilva of the Rams tomorrow. We've got Mike Kliss for the Broncos coming up on Friday, and a bunch more beyond that.
Yeah, and a couple interesting teams there to kick us off. 2 teams we've already covered in this preview series. But, excited to pick those guys' brains and see what we can learn about the Rams and Broncos heading into 2022 here.
Yeah, going to be fun to get into that. Today, we're getting into the NFC South. Like I said, 3rd division we've done. We did the NFC West. We did the AFC West. You can find those on draftsharks.com. Check out the new podcast pages on DS. Our tech guys have been smashing those lately. You can watch the video on there. You can subscribe on your preferred podcast delivery service. So check those pages out. Find us wherever you like to get podcasts. We're on pretty much all of those services at this point as well. But Jared, let's jump into the NFC South. We'll start with the Atlanta Falcons and tell me about what has changed there.
Yeah, no coaching changes. We have head coach Arthur Smith, offensive coordinator Dave Ragone back for their 2nd season in Atlanta. Year 1 did not go too well for this offense or the team in general, I guess. The 2021 Falcons ranked 29th in total yards, 26th in points. They were 31st in plays. They were a pass-leaning offense. They were 8th in pass rate, 14th in situation-neutral pass rate. They were also 11th in situation-neutral pace. So I guess the pace they played at would suggest we should expect some more play volume from this offense this season, although I don't think it's going to be a good offense. They're not going to be converting many 3rd downs. Not an offense we're super excited about in fantasy football heading into this season.
I would even drop the super and say we're not at all excited about it. I mean, this offense was bad in year 1 under Arthur Smith, looked like it would be, and then it lost Calvin Ridley to suspension. Then it dumped its veteran quarterback and went with a veteran quarterback that has not been very good so far in the NFL. So there's really nothing to like overall. We'll talk about the specific guys as we move on. You mentioned them being slightly pass leaning. I think they had to be last year because the backfield stunk. I still landed just under 60% for projecting their pass rush because I don't think that they're built to throw the ball a whole lot. I think where that could go up, though, is if they do struggle and trail even more often. I don't even know if you can trail more often than last season, but, they just might have to pass the ball more than that again.
Yeah, I mean, the backfield still isn't great. The quarterback situation got shakier too. DraftKings Sportsbook has Atlanta's over/under win total at 5. That's the 2nd lowest. Only the Texans are lower at 4.5. So it's going to be a bad team. Even if they want to run more, I don't think they're going to be able to. So yeah, they were around 61% pass last year. I have them at 59.5% this year. And again, that might even be low if they're going to be as bad as these Vegas lines expect them to be.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that I'm not even sure it's fair that they're significantly ahead of Houston in win projection. The things look bad in Atlanta. So let's move on from the overall bleak outlook, and we'll talk about the individual players at quarterback. Of course, they've got a battle. We'll see how it goes. They signed Marcus Mariota in free agency. Then they drafted Desmond Ridder, not until the 3rd round. So, usually a 3rd round quarterback is not a strong candidate to start right away. I think that Desmond Ridder is abnormally well set up for a 3rd round quarterback to compete for early starting time. He was a 4-year starter at Cincinnati. He was productive throughout that stretch, progressed throughout that. Of course, he also progressed the program throughout that to the point where they were a playoff team last year in FBS. And Arthur Smith has already talked up his intelligence, quote, light years ahead of most young quarterbacks in that particular aspect. So I wouldn't say I'm excited about Ridder either short or long term, but in terms of him versus Marcus Mariota, I think there's a shot that he's starting at some point in the first half of this season.
Yeah, and Arthur Smith even left open the possibility that Ridder is going to start at some point this season. And, that's kind of rare if we're talking early in the offseason for a coach to come in and say, this rookie has a chance to play. So I'm sure we're going to see both of these guys this season. I would bet pretty safely that Mariota is going to be under center week 1, but that Ridder is going to come in because, Mariota is going to struggle. I wish he was getting another chance in a better situation, because I still think Mariota could be like, a league average NFL starter, and maybe even more than that in fantasy because of the rushing. But man, this O-line is shaky. The weapons we'll get to are shaky. So I do think Mariota is going to struggle. I think the only reason to consider these guys in fantasy, and it's really only 2 quarterback and super flex leagues, is both guys have mobility. Desmond Ridder ran the 4.52 40 at the combine, 96th percentile relative athletic score. So he's going to provide some fantasy value with his legs. And then Mariota averaged, about 4 carries and 22 rushing yards per game when he was starting with the Titans. So, that could boost these guys into like mid-range quarterback 2 territory when they're under center. But again, it's not going to be a pretty situation for either of them.
Yeah, for a little context, though, Daniel Jones, 4.5 carries, 26.3 yards per game rushing so far. So he's a better runner in the NFL, at least in terms of production, than Marcus Mariota was with the Titans. So that's the thing, is Mariota wasn't very good in any aspect in Tennessee. He was decent over his first 2 years, topped 5% touchdown rates in each of those years, 7.6 yards per pass attempt over that span, 62.9% completions with the Titans, but lost his job to Ryan Tannehill, could only land a backup job with the Raiders, didn't get any more opportunities in between his first and second year with the Raiders after signing there, and then only found this opportunity in Atlanta this offseason. And they signed him to that 2-year deal, similar to what Mitchell Trubisky got in Pittsburgh. It's really just a 1-year guaranteed deal, kind of a let's see what happens, and he's our veteran insurance guy. There's really been no reason given by Mariota for us to bet on him going forward, though.
Yeah, I don't think Atlanta's 2023 starting quarterback is on their roster right now. I think they were already looking ahead to next year's draft class at quarterbacks. It's a strong one.
I think if I had to bet right now who their 2023 starter would be between these two, I would definitely bet Desmond Ridder.
Yes.
Pretty heavily.
Yeah, I agree there.
So let's move on to running back, because I agree that there's not really a whole lot of interest in the quarterbacks, and we'll talk about them again in the ADP section. Running back Cordarrelle Patterson, of course, was a breakthrough guy last year, 10th in PPR points, 12th in non-PPR points, 17th in expected PPR points, and 21st in expected non-PPR. So outperformed his level of usage last year in terms of fantasy scoring.
Yeah, and did a lot of his damage in the passing game. He was awesome there. Not surprising for a guy who, really spent a lot of his career prior to this as a wide receiver and a special teams guy. But Patterson, 5th among running backs in targets, 6th in catches, 2nd in receiving yards. Among 49 running backs with 30-plus targets last year, Patterson 2nd in both PFF receiving grade and yards per route run, behind only Christian McCaffrey. He wasn't nearly as good in the running game, 44th in PFF rushing grade, 30th in elusive rating. Also, really tailed off late last season. He had an ankle injury in week 11. Over the final 4 games, just 71 rushing yards on 31 carries, just 6 catches over those final 4 games. So, the fact that he tailed off, he's in his 30s. He already wasn't great in the running game. I do think Atlanta probably wants to scale back his rushing workload a bit. I do think, though, and especially looking at the other weapons on this team, that Patterson's going to continue to play a big role in this passing game.
I'm not sure weapons is really a fair term to use when we're talking about the Atlanta offense, but yeah, we'll kind of get to his valuation more in the ADP section. But I think that the takeaway here is he is probably still the best running back on the Falcons. The team probably doesn't want him to operate like a true lead back. Arthur Smith has talked about him moving around, which might even mean, more receiving work this year than last year, because Patterson spent 62% of his snaps in the backfield last year. So maybe we see more work in the slot, or, just lining up in different spots, which would leave more places for the more traditional running backs that are on the roster. The first guy that I want to bring up of those is Tyler Algier, who, of course, is the rookie, joined the team as a 5th-round pick, was a walk-on at BYU, then redshirted, was a move to linebacker in the middle of his college career because they needed help at that position, but then moved back to running back and dominated backfield work over his final 2 seasons at BYU. What do you think of Tyler Algier heading into this situation?
Yeah, I like the player. You mentioned the production at BYU. He was 13th in PFF rushing grade last year among 173 college running backs with 100 plus carries. He was 20th among those 173 in elusive rating. So like the player. I mean, I'm not gonna say I love him. He's not super exciting. I think he's a solid runner. Situation's obviously good. We'll talk about Damian Williams, who's kind of, I think, Algiers' competition for work alongside Cordarrelle Patterson. The one thing holding me back about getting too excited here is just the fact that we're talking about a 5th round pick. Algier was the 12th running back off the board. So 28 running backs were selected in round 5 over the previous 10 NFL drafts. Only 3 of those guys even hit 800 rushing yards. Only 4 of them reached 500 rushing yards. So it's just rare to see a 5th round back come in and make an immediate impact. That doesn't mean Algier can't do it. I just don't want to, bet too heavily on it just because of the situation.
Yeah, if you're getting excited about any day 3 NFL draft pick, then you probably need to stop and pull back a little bit. Algier is certainly well set up. So he was productive in college, which we already talked about. 4th nationally in rushing yards last year, below average speed score, below average burst score, below average agility score. So he's not a supreme athlete among running backs. So that's worth keeping in mind. But 84th percentile college dominator rating, according to Player Profiler. And that's a category that looks at the percentage of his team's offense that a running back accounted for. 66th percentile college yards per carry. It's a little early to have all the words going. 77th percentile target share for the position. So he was involved as both a runner and a receiver. And, like you alluded to, like I just said, we shouldn't count on a day 3 NFL draft pick giving us big stuff. That said, we also need only look back to last year where Elijah Mitchell emerged from round 6 to produce numbers. Khalil Herbert in spurts for Chicago when the opportunity presented itself. Within that span that you mentioned, Jordan Howard was a 5th round pick. Aaron Jones was a 5th round pick. Chris Carson, a 7th round pick. So it's unlikely that a guy delivers big stuff from that range, but it's not unprecedented.
And again, if anyone's going to do it based on situation, Algier is set up nicely because his competition for that work right now, at least, is Damian Williams, who signed a 1-year, $1.6 million deal with only $500,000 guaranteed in free agency. You look at his career. He had that nice run late in 2019 and through the Super Bowl. It was highly publicized. I think that kind of makes him overrated, honestly, because he hasn't done anything beyond that. That 2019 was the only season he's topped 50 carries or 23 catches. He turned 30 in April. So we're talking about like a journeyman backup here. I think Williams is like, as of now, and I still think Atlanta could add to this backfield, but as of now, he's like the emergency plan if Algier doesn't pan out, if Patterson deals with injuries or whatever.
And not just a journeyman backup, but a journeyman receiving complement. So you mentioned the carry numbers. He's been between 23 and 37 targets every year. So comparatively, he has been used more as a receiver than as a runner. Career low 6.4 yards per catch last year in Chicago, fell short of 20 receptions for the first time. That, of course, followed a year off for COVID. So, it's an old back who has just never gotten significant work. And now if I'm choosing between him and Tyler Algier, it's just an easy choice between the two of them. He was 3rd among Bears running backs by a wide margin in carries last year. By the way, behind Khalil Herbert, who was a 6th round rookie that year. So there's you might hear people talk about Damian Williams and talk about how they like him as a very late best ball pick. If you look at ADP, though, he's not getting drafted mostly. He's RB 83. So I don't want to overrate how much people like him. He's really a 0 shares guy for me, though, at any level.
Yeah, me too. And because even if he takes over a significant role, like, he's not a great player and it's a bad offense. I'm just not excited even about the upside.
Right. Of course, the positive for everybody is like it was last year, is you can't look at this backfield and say, this guy is awesome. Cordarrelle Patterson looks better this year than he did heading into last season. But otherwise, it's the 2 we just mentioned, Kadri Allison, Caleb Huntley, and Avery Williams, who is a tiny, fast guy that they converted from cornerback this year to play running back. So like we said this time last year, wouldn't be surprised if Atlanta adds somebody either through trade or after players start getting cut. But, it's just not a situation to get excited about anyone with.
Exactly.
Pass catchers, though, a lot more intrigue here. It's still concentrated in just a couple of guys, though. And we usually start with wide receivers, but everything starts with Kyle Pitts right now in the Atlanta passing game. And he was better than his fantasy numbers would say last year, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I had everything but the touchdowns last year. So 1,026 receiving yards for Pitts, second most by a tight end and by a rookie tight end in NFL history, third most catches by a rookie tight end in NFL history. Was even good for the position outside of first year players. So among 35 tight ends with 40 plus targets last season, Pitts fifth in yards per route run, sixth in PFF receiving grade. Finished air quotes, just sixth in PPR points because he scored just one touchdown. But it wasn't even for lack of opportunity. I mean, Pitts 10th among tight ends with 23 red zone targets, 13th among tight ends with 6 end zone targets. His expected touchdowns, according to Pro Football Focus, 6.1. So that was the 9th most expected touchdown. So he just got unlucky not scoring touchdowns. If he had, he would have finished a few spots higher in fantasy points. He'd possibly be going even higher than he is right now in fantasy drafts.
But Jared, is it concerning that we don't even know yet that he can score a touchdown in the United States?
Oh, that's right. It was a London touchdown, wasn't it?
That's right. Although I did see our buddy Ian Hartitz at PFF pointed out that Kyle Pitts can only score touchdowns in London. So the team went and drafted Drake London to keep him on the field to really tap into that ability heading into the season.
Sounds like something Hartitz would come up with.
Yeah, it's probably my favorite tweet that I've ever seen from him. So Drake London is the addition here. You mentioned the reasons to like Kyle Pitts, and we'll talk about ADP as we get to it. But Drake London, they took as the first wide receiver off the board. I think we all expected them to take wide receiver. I think we were all like sitting there hoping they were not going to take Kenny Pickett at 8th overall because that is not where he belonged. Probably didn't even belong at 20th overall, but they didn't. They took Drake London as the first wide receiver, and he steps into a great spot for opportunity.
Yeah, and I think he's ready to capture the opportunity. Had 3 really nice seasons at USC. So he had 567 yards and 5 scores as a true freshman. Just 6 games as a sophomore in 2020. That was the COVID shortened season, but London averaged 5.5 catches, 84 receiving yards per game in 2020. Actually beat Amon-Ra St. Brown in receiving yards per game in 2020. And we know what he just did as a rookie. And then last year with Amon-Ra St. Brown gone, London had a massive season, just 8 games. His season got cut short by a broken ankle, but 11 catches, 136 yards, and 0.9 touchdowns per game across those 8 games. First in the country in catches per game, second in receiving yards per game. Also led all draft eligible receivers in PFF receiving grades, and then got the awesome draft capital, 8th overall. We know there's a correlation between draft capital and immediate opportunity. And again, we'll talk about a little bit the rest of this wide receiver depth chart. There's not much to talk about. So London should be right there with Kyle Pitts competing for the team lead in targets this season.
And the closest thing to interesting with this offense is that Drake London is a big dude, but he operated at all levels of that USC offense, played inside, played outside. Kyle Pitts is a tight end who plays wide receiver. Cordarrelle Patterson is a guy that they can move all around. So those 3 guys will be at least interesting for seeing exactly what the offense does with them. It would be nice if there was a quality quarterback, and we'll see if Desmond Ridder can become that. But, it falls short of being exciting. But those 3 are at least interesting, and that's more than I can say about the rest of this wide receiver core, where the only other guy even getting drafted, looking at ADP is Bryan Edwards. And honestly, I'm not interested in Bryan Edwards until he shows me that I need to be.
Well, he's cheap enough where you can take shots on him. I'm just barely hanging on. I've taken him, in the 18th round of these underdogs a few times. Actually, the reason I've been taking Edwards is that if you have Cardinal stacks, it's Arizona, Atlanta, week 17. So I like getting Bryan Edwards at the end to those Cardinal stacks. I mean, there's nothing about Edwards' first 2 seasons to be optimistic about. He dealt with a bunch of injuries as a rookie, caught just 11 passes. Then last year he was, relatively healthy, just 571 yards and 3 touchdowns. He was near the bottom of the league in both PFF receiving grade and yards per route run. So, I mean, the things to hang on to still, he's, still not even 24 yet. He turns 24 in November, and he did have a nice prospect profile coming out, had awesome, market shares at South Carolina, including a breakout as a true freshman at 17 years old. And he was the 81st overall pick of the 2020 draft. He got 3rd round draft capital. So the prospect profile was nice. Again, if people were excited about him and even taking him in round, 13 or 14, I'd be out. But the fact that he's still still available with your very last pick, and there's opportunity for playing time and targets here. That has me at least keeping an eye on him this summer.
I would keep him on my dynasty roster to see what happens, but the team that took him in round 3 also just traded him for not even a full draft pick. It was like a swap of draft picks. Granted, it was new leadership there, but still, it's a guy that they didn't need to give up on. They said, you're not going to do anything for us, and just sent him away. So certainly not a guy I'm betting on. Honestly, even in that end of best ball draft phase, I'd probably rather take a shot on like Olamide Zaccheaus if I'm taking a Falcons wide receiver, not because I think he's a better bet straight up than Bryan Edwards, but you're getting the even lower ownership percentage in, the situation where it's like, I don't know who it's going to be. It could be anybody. So I think I would chase that lower ownership. That said, like you alluded to, Bryan Edwards is going late enough that if you're like, I'm going to take a shot on Bryan Edwards, it's fine.
I'm taking shots on Bryan Edwards. Can't stop me.
That's right. So now we'll go into the ADP review section, powered primarily by the Underdog ADP, because there's been so much drafting on there. And if you're not drafting on Underdog yet, you can go set up an account, enter promo code Sharks. You get a full deposit match up to $100. So you can double the money that you put in there and get some drafts going. We'll start at quarterback. And, we talked about it, Jared. The only place I'm interested at all in this quarterback crew is Superflex or quarterback. Even there, it's not exciting. Marcus Mariota's QB 28 in Underdog, Superflex ADP. Desmond Ridder is QB 34, about 5 rounds behind Mariota. So at those two prices, it's pretty easily Ridder over Mariota for me.
Yeah, Superflex only for me too. I've heard some people talk about taking both these guys and just locking up the starter, but I don't want to spend two roster spots out of 18 on one quarterback who's again probably not going to give you many top 12 weeks. So I'm out on both these guys.
Yeah, if I'm in a lineup setting Superflex draft, then I can see taking both of them and you drop whichever one's not starting early in the season. If it's a best ball tournament, I would not waste 2 spots on that QB situation. I'd rather just, bet on one. And if he doesn't work out, he doesn't even kill that team if he doesn't work out. So I would rather bet on one and move on to another situation for the second. We might have actually a Superflex sleeper quarterback later in this very show. Running back, Cordarrelle Patterson's at RB 34 on Underdog, RB 29 on FFPC, which is full PPR. And, that context is important because the way that Patterson went last year, and especially the slow finish, makes me say, okay, we shouldn't expect more of what he did early last year. But that's what drafters are saying in general. Nobody's excited about Patterson this season. He's dropped from where he was at the beginning of draft season, and that's despite re-signing with the team that allowed him to break out for fantasy purposes.
Yeah, Patterson's RB 29 in our half PPR rankings right now, so 5 spots ahead of where he's being drafted. He's still not like a main target for me. Again, like I said, it's when I have those early Arizona stacks is when I'm targeting these Falcons. Otherwise, it's a team I'm for the most part staying away from.
Yeah, he's not a target player for me either. I don't think that there is league-winning upside here. There's limited touchdown potential. It doesn't sound like the Falcons want him to dominate carries, and they added Drake London at wide receiver. So, I guess it's at least similar target competition with worse quarterback play than he had last year. So just, he's fine value-wise, not exciting. Tyler Algier is RB 47, RB 48 in FFPC best ball, RB 50 in Football Guys Players Championship drafts on FFPC. I think that's interesting because I think Tyler Algier might even look a little better for lineup setting, with the context where you're stashing him as a late RB4 or RB5. And the benefit to lineup setting leagues is if we get to week 1 and it just looks like they're disappointed with what they're getting from Tyler Algier, you can drop him for whatever's available on the waiver wire because we know that there are going to be players that emerge in week 1 in all formats. For best ball, he's eaten up that roster spot no matter what happens.
Yeah, it seems funny to say for a 5th-round rookie, but I almost think, at least relative to the guys he's going around, that Algier is more of like a floor pick. I think so he's going in the same range as like Ty Davis Price and Darrell Henderson and Isaiah Spiller. Like Algier has a clearer path, I think, to work than those guys. So, maybe he gives you that higher floor to give you something. but I also think his upside isn't nearly as high as those other guys. So he's a guy I'll be more interested in when we get away from these big best ball tournaments and, maybe just competing against 11 other owners in the league. I don't see the upside to win these big underdog or big FFPC best ball tournaments.
Yeah, I agree. Not a target player for me, but somebody that I'll mix in at the point where he's going. He's behind Kenneth Gainwell, behind Ty Davis-Price, as you mentioned, behind Khalil Herbert, even though he's got a better path to work for his team than Khalil Herbert does for the Bears. Only slightly ahead of James Robinson, J.D. McKissick, and Darrell Williams on that half PPR format. Damian Williams, like I mentioned, you'll find pockets of support for him, but he's barely getting drafted by ADP. That's as it should be, I think. And he's really only a best ball consideration because I don't think there's upside here. You're basically hoping he gives you one good week that two guys ahead of him get hurt by the end of the season. Wide receiver, Drake London, wide receiver 37, which I think is a good level for him to be going at because you can still see upside from there, even in a bad offense. I'm still favoring Adam Thielen and Elijah Moore within a round of where Drake London's going ADP wise.
I like Thielen over London. I like London over Moore. London's probably my favorite target on Atlanta, and I'm not saying he's a guy I'm going all in on, but I do like him there. I do think he has upside, like you said, beyond that. I mean, he's a good-looking prospect, got top 10 draft capital, and there's a chance he gets 130, 140 targets this season. And if he does that, even with shaky quarterback play, like he's going to be a big profit at this price.
Yeah, I think it's definitely fair to ponder who has the highest ceiling among like him, Elijah Moore, Devontae Smith, Russell Gage, all going in a similar range in underdog drafts. Right behind him are Hunter Renfrow and Michael Thomas, which I don't know, kind of helps lower the ceiling on London versus what's around him. Not lower the ceiling, but make him less of a target player for me in that range. Somebody I'm certainly willing to take some of, especially as you mentioned, if it's with Arizona players or if I plan on taking one of those Atlanta quarterbacks late, but that doesn't quite stand out for me.
It's a nice wide receiver range in general, which is probably the reason I don't have more Drake London right now.
Mm-hmm. Brian Edwards, like I mentioned, next Falcons receiver at wide receiver 93. If you're like Jared and you want to take him, go for it. No big deal.
I'm definitely boosting that ADP.
There you go. Making him move. Kyle Pitts, tight end 3, which is to be expected. He's a little bit more than a round behind Mark Andrews, though, and a little bit less than a round ahead of Darren Waller. So that late round 3 ADP on underdog is worth noting, not just for him versus the tight ends, but versus the rest of the field. Because if you compare Kyle Pitts in late round 3 to Travis Kelce late round 1, Mark Andrews somewhere in round 2, taking Pitts versus those two guys allows you to start with running back and or wide receiver in each of the first 2 rounds. And then you can still get similar target share upside with Pitts versus those top 2 tight ends.
Yeah, Pitts isn't like, even though he's only a round behind Andrews, he's just in a range in these drafts right now where I feel like there's a drop off sometimes, at least at the other positions. Like once you get into the later third round of these underdog drafts, like if Alvin Kamara and James Conner are off the board and DJ Moore is a guy like late in round 3, but if those guys are gone, then you're getting into, Travis Etienne, Marquise Brown, Cortland Sutton, Jalen Waddle. I feel like that's a tier drop for me. So that's kind of why I've been getting Pitts. Like I definitely like him as a value over Mark Andrews. And I probably even like him over Darren Waller. I feel like Waller's going around later, but it's like the same tier of player at that point in draft. So Pitts to me is like that elite tight end I can get when the quality is sort of dropped off at the other positions.
And Kyle Pitts should lead his team in targets this year. Darren Waller could easily finish 3rd, at least likely to finish 2nd among Raiders.
Yep, fair.
Moving on to the Carolina Panthers, no change at head coach. Matt Rule enters his 3rd season as head coach, but the OC is different. We had Joe Brady in that spot each of the past 2 years. He got dumped in early December. Now it's Ben McAdoo, who spent 4 years as first OC and then head coach of the Giants 2014 to 2017. Those offenses ranked 10th, 8th, 25th, 21st in yards, 13th, 6th, 26th, 31st in points. 3 of his teams were over 60% passing, 17th, 16th, 6th, and 12th in neutral pass rate. So seems like he's at least slightly pass leaning. We'll see where that goes with this new team, but Carolina looks like it's built to lean a little bit further on the pass. And Matt Rule needs something exciting in this 3rd season because he heads into this year on the hot seat.
And they did upgrade a quarterback. We'll get to that next. So I think that helps the pass rate a bit. The other note I had on McAdoo, fast-paced offenses in New York. All 4 of those Giants offenses were top 7 in pace, and 3 of the 4 were top 4 in situation neutral pace. The Panthers last year, 17th in pace, 18th in situation neutral pace. So hopefully McAdoo speeds this offense up. That should help the play volume this season.
Another feature of his offense with the Giants was quick throws, getting the ball out of the quarterback's hand quickly. Eli Manning in those 4 seasons finished 7th, tied for 9th, 4th, and 2nd in time to throw, according to PFF. Baker Mayfield now probably the starter, tied for 21st, tied for 15th, tied for 32nd, tied for 26th in his 4 seasons. So we're either going to see the quarterback holding the ball longer than the coordinator wants him to, or we'll see a coordinator who gets Baker Mayfield to deliver the ball more quickly. At least Baker's got a talented set of pass catchers to work with this year.
Yeah, and I think there are pass catchers that kind of suit that quick passing game, right? I mean, Christian McCaffrey and DJ Moore especially are awesome after the catch.
Yep. And then run pass split, I landed just under 61% for projecting them. I don't expect the Panthers to be good this year, and by the Vegas projections, they have the 5th lowest projected win total. I do think there's upside to the offense. We'll talk more about that as we get into the individual players.
Yeah, 59.5% pass for me, which is up slightly from where they were last year.
Mm-hmm. At QB, as we mentioned, they traded for Baker Mayfield. Minimal investment here. Conditional 2024 draft pick. The Browns are paying 2/3 of his salary. So it was basically the team that would take on Baker Mayfield rather than a team chasing after him. I still think he's likely to be their starter because Sam Darnold stunk again last year. And, clearly it's just the highest upside option they have on their roster now.
Yeah, I think that's the big fantasy takeaway here is that, to me, Mayfield is an upgrade over Darnold, and maybe it's an upgrade going from bad quarterback play to average quarterback play, but it's still an upgrade. Mayfield's 2021 was rough. I mean, he dealt with a bunch of injuries. He had the left shoulder injury, knee injury, foot injury, spent a week on the COVID list. So that was tough. You look back to 2020 though, 63% completion rate, 7.3 yards per attempt, 26 touchdowns versus 8 interceptions. Mayfield was 10th among 32 qualifying quarterbacks in PFF receiving grade that year.
Passing grade.
And passing grade, yep. He's not doing much pass catching. And you look at PFF grades over their career. So Mayfield has earned a higher PFF grade in each of his first 3 NFL seasons than Darnold has in any of his 4 NFL seasons. So, Mayfield, again, looks like an upgrade. I don't think he's going to be much of a fantasy factor. But I think he helps guys like McCaffrey and DJ Moore at least a little bit.
Yeah, I don't think that you give them huge boosts for the move to Baker Mayfield. I do think that there is more of a chance that there is a significant boost than there would have been with Sam Darnold. So as long as you stop short of being excited, I think it's okay to be, cautiously optimistic about the QB switch.
Yep.
Running back, of course, there's room to be excited, even if you're not totally comfy with Christian McCaffrey after 2 seasons mostly lost to injury, played plenty, and we'll talk about what he did in those games. But that's the thing. Christian McCaffrey, you look at him, and the only real thing to dislike is that he got hurt each of the past 2 years. And if that makes you uneasy at the top of the draft, I mean, that's just how it is. You can pass on him and probably still be okay. Most running backs, though, are a pretty good bet to miss some time. Our sports injury predictor algorithm has him projected to miss 2 games, has him as a medium injury risk. It's worth looking at those specific injuries over the past 2 years for McCaffrey. He had a hamstring and a left ankle sprain last year. The year before was a high right ankle sprain, a shoulder injury, a thigh injury. Shoulder and thigh probably aren't issues to even remember going forward. Ankle sprains each of the past 2 years is a bit troubling. A hamstring last year is troubling. I think it's worth, realizing, though, that none of those injuries between the past 2 years was actually a recurrence of a previous one.
Yeah, and I think none of them are long-term issues that are going to hinder his play going forward. McCaffrey had been healthy throughout his football career, really, prior to the last 2 seasons. He's still just 26 years old. He turned 26 last month. He's entering year 6. I looked at our dynasty aging curves. Those say to expect 95% of peak production from a running back in their 6th NFL season. It's really year like 7 and 8 when you start to get a decline from these guys. So he's still, basically in his prime here. And the guy remained super busy and super productive when he was on the field the past couple seasons.
Yeah, and you can check the rankings page, check his full profile, his player page on DraftSharks.com to see the specifics. But that's the thing, is he was still dominant. Christian McCaffrey went on the field despite changing things around him, new coach, new quarterbacks, not good offense. And here's what Matt Rule said about Christian McCaffrey this May. Quote, anytime Christian is out there, he changes, tilts the game, tilts the field. At the same time, we're trying to really invest in Chuba, invest in Deontay and the other backs because we want to make sure that we have a well-rounded offense. That's from SI.com. I'm not buying that they're giving significant work to Chuba Hubbard or Deontay Foreman. There's just no reason to take significant work away from Christian McCaffrey. You can say what you want about trying to limit his exposure and keep him healthy through the season. It makes sense to give the other guys some carries. This is still going to be a backfield dominated by Christian McCaffrey, who has always been even more valuable as a receiver than a runner. So that just naturally takes a little bit of the rushing workload, the hits in between the tackles, away from him. So I'm not altering my touch outlook for him. And I think that he's still way above everybody else at the position in ultimate ceiling, as he's showed us in the past.
Yeah, McCaffrey's gonna lead running backs in fantasy points per game this season. I feel good about that, especially how many games he plays. I wouldn't even mind if he loses 2 or 3 carries from what he had been seeing. So over the last 2 years, he's played 8 full games over the last 2 years, 17.6 carries and 7.1 targets per game over those 8 games. Give me 15 carries and 7 targets per game, and I'm happy. He's going to lead all running backs in PPR points. So I wouldn't mind if he gets scaled back a little bit. Other note here, I'm optimistic about this Panthers O-line. It was not good last year. They were 25th in both PFF run blocking grades and Football Outsiders adjusted line yards. But they spent the 6th overall pick of this spring's draft on Ike Ekwonu. So that hopefully solves left tackle. They have a solid right tackle in Taylor Moton. And then they added guard Austin Corbett and center Bradley Bozeman in free agency, who are both above average starters. So I'm not saying this is going to be a top, probably not even a top 10 O-line, but if it can be an average unit, that'd be a big step up from what they were last year.
Yeah, they're trying to improve it. And, frankly, either direction that it goes helps McCaffrey, because if it's better, then better rushing efficiency. If it's worse, more dump offs to that running back to try to escape the pressure. So, he's just kind of a situation proof player. Obviously, anybody can get hurt and anybody can suffer in a bad situation. But Christian McCaffrey's not a guy that you downgrade for any particular concerns with Carolina. Deontay Foreman, I mentioned they added this offseason. They signed him early in free agency. It was just a 1-year, $2 million deal, though. He ran well in Tennessee last year, of course. It's also worth remembering that the team signed him off the street after Derrick Henry went down. They had him on the practice squad in the second half of 2020. They let him walk at that point. He signed with and was released by that Falcons team last year that relied on Cordarrelle Patterson and Mike Davis in the backfield. He signed with the Titans practice squad in November last year, still didn't even get the opportunity to lead in carries there until after they gave 87-year-old Adrian Peterson a shot. So Foreman in a good backup spot, a good handcuff type of position, but don't overrate either his personal upside or the certainty that he is the number 2 back. Both our friends at Our Lads and ESPN list Chuba Hubbard as the number 2 running back in Carolina right now, ahead of Foreman.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a competition. Neither of these guys was very efficient last year, at least by PFF metrics. So Foreman, 39th in PFF rushing grade among 50 qualifying running backs. Hubbard actually beat him by a little. Hubbard was 33rd in PFF rushing grade. Hubbard was 40th in elusive rating. Deontay Foreman was 28th in elusive rating. Foreman's contract definitely doesn't guarantee him anything. So I think it's a competition. And I think, neither guy has any standalone fantasy value. They're just pure handcuffs behind Christian McCaffrey. And even if McCaffrey goes down, might be a committee, not a super exciting offense. I'm not really drafting either of these guys, especially in best ball.
Yeah, and Tennessee let Deontay Foreman walk after what he did for them last year and opted for a 6th-round rookie in Hassan Haskins instead. So even they're like, he's fine. Chuba Hubbard, by the way, stepped in as the handcuff last year after Christian McCaffrey went down, but then he lost work to Amir Abdullah during the season, who Carolina picked up at that point. When McCaffrey first went down, Hubbard had 63% of the team's carries, 10% of the targets initially. The next time he went down, it was down to 41% of carries, 4.3% of the targets. So the Panthers didn't love what they saw from Hubbard. It's still a competition between him and Foreman. I think they would split work, and it makes me not interested in either guy, even in a handcuff position.
Yeah, again, Hubbard wasn't great as a runner. He was one of the worst running backs in the league in the receiving game, 42nd in PFF receiving grade among 49 qualifiers. So just not an exciting player, not an exciting situation.
Yeah. So on to the pass catchers, where there is more exciting talent. We start with DJ Moore. Among all wide receivers in the NFL since he entered the league in 2018, DJ Moore ranks 7th in targets, 13th in catches, 8th in yards, 16th in yards per game, 13th in total PPR points, 34th in PPR points per game, 46th in touchdowns. So he's getting plenty of opportunities ever since he entered the league. He's doing fine production-wise on what he's getting, and he can't find the end zone.
Yeah, I mean, one of these years we're going to get an 8-9 touchdown season out of DJ Moore, and that's when he's going to, bump into the top 10. Again, I like that he is getting, what I think is a quarterback upgrade heading into 2022. I looked at his expected touchdowns versus actual touchdowns. So the 2 years we have it for, the past two, 2020, 2021. So he scored 4 touchdowns both those seasons. His expected touchdowns were 6.5 and 6.3. So those are like middling marks. So he hasn't been getting awesome opportunity near the end zone. But again, he's been getting more than what the touchdown numbers actually show. So I think he's in for a spike in touchdowns going forward. Volume's still going to be big. It's basically the same group of pass catchers returning for 2022. And again, quarterback upgrade. So Moore seems like a safe wide receiver too. And again, if he does, get some touchdown luck one of these seasons, I think he can definitely finish as a wide receiver 1.
Yeah, now I don't think we should expect, when you say touchdown luck, I don't think we should expect a double-digit touchdown season. Yeah. Maybe that can happen, but he's just not set up that way. If you look at our projections, though, he's not even projected for 6 touchdown catches, and he's up around wide receiver 1 territory across formats. So it's not going to take a whole lot of regression in that category to boost him a little bit. And we'll talk about his ADP in a few minutes. But the primary competition for him at the position is Robbie Anderson, as it was the past 2 years. And Robbie Anderson, of course, is coming off a terrible year, just a year after he played a surprisingly high volume target role versus DJ Moore in that Carolina offense. I think probably we're looking at something in between those two extremes this season, and the way that last year went, how poorly it went, I think really leaves drafters in general having no idea what to do with Robbie Anderson. And, in general versus how he has produced in his career so far, saying, I just don't want to be in on him.
I don't know what to do with Robbie Anderson. I mean, I've been taking him because he's going late enough where it doesn't cost a whole lot. But I mean, he was one of the least efficient wide receivers in the NFL last season, 4.7 yards per target. That was 88th among 89 wide receivers with 50-plus targets. Look at Robbie Anderson's yards per target over his first 5 NFL seasons. So it was 4.7 last year. Prior to that, 7.5, 8.3, 8.0, 8.1, 8.1. Part of it was definitely the quarterback play. He wasn't good either, though. If you look at PFF receiving grades, 83rd among 89 qualifying wide receivers. It was Anderson's worst grade since his rookie season. But again, he had those strong yards per target numbers his first 5 seasons. He still just turned 29 in May, so I don't think he's done. So I think, again, where his price is, I think it's worth betting on at least somewhat of a bounce back, especially because Carolina didn't add any competition at wide receiver. I mean, we'll talk about Terrace Marshall. He's like the competition who, was the second round pick last year coming off a really poor rookie season, and Carolina didn't add anything else. So, it's definitely the chances there for Anderson to, basically play the same role he did last year. And if he can, get, that he was 27th among wide receivers and targets last year. If he can get that type of volume and even just be, average efficiency wise, we're talking about a wide receiver 3.
Last year was terrible. But as you mentioned from those numbers, it's not proof that we can't count on Robbie Anderson. It's an outlier versus what he's done throughout the rest of his career. And he's played with terrible quarterbacks. It was easy to think heading into last season, oh, Sam Darnold, Robbie Anderson has played with him and produced with him before. This is probably a positive move for him in an offense that already used him a lot last season. We have actually seen now in 3 straight years that Robbie Anderson has played with Sam Darnold, his targets per route have fallen. So even though it was a familiar quarterback, it was a downgrade for him at quarterback. So this QB switch is probably at least neutral, if not good, for Robbie Anderson. And Baker Mayfield at full health is probably the best quarterback that Robbie Anderson will have played with in his career. So things are good in that area. And the other thing to like here is that Matt Rule, his history of Robbie Anderson goes back to college, where he petitioned for him to return to the team at Temple when Robbie Anderson got into academic trouble. Now he says he expects, quotes, ton of production from Robbie Anderson in the new offense under Ben McAdoo. And as you mentioned, the big thing here is the ADP, which, we'll talk about more, but he's wide receiver 70 right now, even after moving back up lately. That's below where he has finished in any of his NFL seasons so far. So there's no downside to what his ADP is right now.
And then again, his competition is Terrace Marshall, who I liked coming into the league last year, coming out of LSU, got nice draft capital, but man, just a disastrous rookie season, just 17 catches on 30 targets. He was dead last among 118 wide receivers with 30 plus targets and yards per route run. He was 114th among those 118 in PFF receiving grade. So, and we've seen, it's rare for a receiver to have that bad of a rookie year and then kind of, end up being a hit. So I'm not totally out on Marshall after just one season. We'll keep an eye on him this summer, but I'm much less optimistic than I was a year ago. And I do think, Anderson is the clear favorite to be the number 2 wide receiver this season.
Yeah, and let's skip ahead to the ADP review because the tight ends stink here, and Carolina's making sure that we shouldn't care about them. So Robbie Anderson, as I mentioned, wide receiver 70 in underdog drafts. Terrace Marshall is at wide receiver 89 right now, and he's been interesting because he started out in that range, dipped all the way into the 100s at wide receiver, and now he's back up to wide receiver 89. Like anywhere in there, he's fine to bet on because, as you mentioned, we shouldn't be excited about him or betting on him making a strong rebound now, but that's a pretty marginal bet. He's going at a level where if you get, 1 to 2 starter worthy weeks, he's paying off value there. I'm not betting on anything big. And I think the way that Terrace Marshall debuted makes me feel even better about betting on Robbie Anderson. Between them, I like Robbie Anderson more. I think each of those guys is going at a level where you can take some shares.
I think you can take them both in these underdog drafts. They're that cheap where, you hope one of them gives you decent production every week. By the way, all these Panthers wide receivers are up a little bit in ADP since the Baker Mayfield trade. Anderson up from wide receiver 75 to wide receiver 70, Marshall wide receiver 95 to wide receiver 89. And then DJ Moore was wide receiver 18 before the Baker Mayfield trade. He's now up to wide receiver 15.
Yeah, interesting that they've all seen bumps like that. I think maybe that indicates a little bit too much optimism for Baker Mayfield, but it's fair because it's certainly a better quarterback situation. I think probably too, more than a big boost with Baker. It's like, phew, now we know who the Carolina quarterback is going to be at least.
And I think they're all still fairly priced, maybe undervalued at their, new ADPs. DJ Moore is still a guy I like at wide receiver 15. He's still going in the back half of round 3. I think that's a nice spot for him. Again, he's safe. And if he gets, one of those, 8 touchdown seasons, I think he's going to beat his ADP.
And I think he's a particularly nice option if you start with 2 running backs and then take your first wide receiver at the end of round 3.
For sure. Yep.
Looking back to quarterback, Baker Mayfield, we'll see where his ADP settles. He's up some, but not significantly. In FFPC drafting, he's up about 2.5 rounds. That's still late. I don't think he'll climb into the top 20, so I don't really think ADP is going to be a factor of whether or not to take him. I don't think the ceiling's high here. I think he's the kind of quarterback that's only interesting as a stacking partner if you already have Carolina wideouts.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And again, these guys are cheap enough where, I think, it doesn't sound like a team you want to be super invested in stack wise, but I do think that these Carolina stacks are okay just because they are so cheap. Baker's quarterback 26 since the trade, kind of limited data, less than a week. But quarterback 26 is where he's going. I think that's fine. Again, he's not exciting. But he can definitely score as a top 20 quarterback, if only because of the weapons he has here.
Christian McCaffrey, of course, number 2 overall, right behind Jonathan Taylor, right ahead of Cooper Kupp. I think that's an appropriate level. I think there's a higher ceiling for him even than Jonathan Taylor. I'd probably split picks between them. In full PPR, I would definitely favor Christian McCaffrey over Jonathan Taylor. I would still favor Cooper Kupp over both of them if I'm picking in the first spot a bunch of times. But, if you have 10 picks, I wouldn't go 50% for any of those 3 guys, I guess.
Yeah, McCaffrey, Taylor, and Kupp should be the top 3 picks in every draft, I think. The half PPR does hurt McCaffrey a bit. We actually have him as our RB2 behind Taylor in half PPR. McCaffrey is our RB1 in full PPR.
Mm-hmm. And, I mentioned tight ends. It's Tommy Tremble, who could be interesting if the team hadn't re-signed Ian Thomas. That's his last name, right?
Yeah.
See, I'm trying to forget that he even exists. And they paid him. Like, it wasn't just okay, we'll get you off the market. They paid him before free agency even began, even though he's basically just a blocker.
Yep, no interest in either of these guys for me.
So let's move on to the New Orleans Saints, Jared. Big coaching changes for this one.
Yeah, I don't think there's a team in the NFL, excuse me, with more questions right now than the Saints. And it starts with the coaching staff after Sean Payton retired. He had been the Saints head coach since 2006. The Saints did opt for continuity in replacing Sean Payton. They hired Dennis Allen as head coach. He's been the Saints defensive coordinator since 2015. And Pete Carmichael is staying on as the Saints offensive coordinator. He's been in that position since 2009. Of course, the question when we get situations like this is, how much of the offense did Carmichael really have control over, and how much was it of, Sean Payton's offense? So I do think Carmichael is probably going to try to keep things similar, but we'll see how that goes, because I do think, Payton is one of the best play callers in the NFL.
It's also fair to wonder what the offense even looks like post Drew Brees, because we haven't had a full season of that yet. We had a season of it last year where it was broken up, with Jameis Winston's midseason injury. So there's a lot of guessing as to what this offense will look like, what it will do run pass split wise. And I think how you guess on it comes down a lot to what the ADPs are, which we'll certainly get to. Where are you at for projecting run pass split here?
Yeah, so, last year Saints finished 30th in pass rate and 19th in situation neutral pass rate. They were a bit pass heavier in the 6 full games Jameis Winston played. They were 50% situation neutral pass for the season, 52.2% in Winston's 6 full games. So I do think that makes sense. If Winston's healthy, they're going to throw a bit more this season. I have them at 56% pass this year, which is, still below league average, but up about 5 percentage points from where they finished last season.
Yeah, I think that's a solid range to put it. They certainly made some additions to the passing game versus last year, which we'll get to. And let's start with that quarterback, Jameis Winston, who they did re-sign in the offseason despite the ACL tear. Big passing numbers from him the last time he had a full season as a starter in Tampa Bay. QB3 in total points that year. QB14 in points per pass attempt. Last year was 13th in points per game among his healthy games, second in points per pass attempt. Big reason for that was an 8.7% touchdown rate, which is not likely to happen again. We'll see, again, exactly what this offense looked like, because a lot of what has driven Jameis Winston's fantasy numbers in the past has been high pass volume. And I'm not sure that this offense is going to do that. Maybe it'll get pushed more toward that if they are in some trailing game scripts, which they certainly look capable of.
And Winston, so last year, again, it was only 6 full games, but he was a boomer bust fantasy option. He had 2 top 5 finishes last year, but he was 25th or worse in 3 of those other 6 games. Of course, we'll have to keep an eye on the knee injury. Winston, Halloween, ACL, MCL, and meniscus injuries for Winston. So, he's going to be about 11 months removed from those, 10 and a half, 11 months removed from those when the 2022 season kicks off. He was on the field for OTAs, was held out of team drills, but it does sound like the Saints expect him to be ready to go for training camp. And as long as he has no setbacks, he should be this team starter, and it really shouldn't be an issue by the time week 1 rolls around.
And certainly the way that they treated the position this offseason looks like they want him and expect him to be the starter this year. Traditionally, quarterbacks have fared well versus other positions in keeping production up after ACL tears. So we shouldn't overrate that factor, but it's definitely a concern and a challenge in him producing this year, beyond him being in what's still a new situation, even though he's been with the team a couple years now, especially with new wide receivers around him. Worth noting too, they signed Andy Dalton to back him up, which to me seems like an upgrade over Trevor Siemian and Taysom Hill as the backup last year. And it seems like the Saints believe that too, because they let Siemian walk and they moved Taysom Hill to tight end.
Yep, for sure.
Running back, Alvin Kamara is the big one. Missed 4 games last year, still finished 8th in total PPR points at the position, just 17th in PPR points per touch. Caught fewer passes, lost some efficiency last year, nearly 1.0 yards per carry behind his previous low. It was a situation where you would expect a guy to be less efficient. He was certainly very much that last season.
Yeah, there are definitely reasons to be concerned about Kamara going forward. I mean, you mentioned the knee injury last year. I don't know how much that had to do with the drop in efficiency, but he did finish with career lows in yards per carry, PFF rushing grade, PFF receiving grade, Football Outsiders rushing DVOA, all career lows. But, the fantasy production was still there, as you mentioned, 7th in PPR points per game. He was 3rd in expected PPR points per game, 2nd in expected half PPR points per game, career high 18.5 carries per game for Kamara. That was, his previous career high was around 13 carries. So he definitely took on a much bigger workload. So, I mean, if he's going to get that type of volume, he's going to pay off, especially where he's going. But then on top of all this, we have the suspension possibility, maybe likelihood at this point. I think that, the question is, when is the suspension going to come? Because he has a hearing scheduled for August 1st. But that's just a hearing. That's not even the start of the court case. And the NFL does tend to wait on this stuff to play out before suspending him. So again, I think a suspension's coming. It sounds like it's going to be, at least 6 games. But when that comes is the issue. Drafters are assuming it's going to come this year because his ADP is, down into the late 3rd round now. So I've found it tough to pass on Kamara if I can get him in the late 3rd round, just, for the possibility that, he does get in all 17 games this season.
I mean, I would call a suspension a possibility more than a likelihood. As you mentioned, they have a hearing in early August. That's a pretty early phase of a trial. And especially when you look at the fact that this incident happened way back in January or early February in Las Vegas, and now they're still at that early phases of the trial. I think the only way that we get a suspension during the season at this point is if that video that's rumored to be out there of the assault emerges. If that happens, the NFL will be like, oh, now we realize how serious it is. We're going to go ahead and suspend him. Short of that, I don't think we're going to see league movement on this until the court case progresses. So as of right now, I'm going to treat Alvin Kamara as though he is playing a full season, maybe work in a slight downgrade, but without knowing the possibility that he gets suspended at all. And then the length of that suspension, because it's tough for me to imagine them suspending him 6 games with nothing to go on in terms of the legal outcome of the case and no overt proof, which we know the NFL cares about. I'm treating him like full season Alvin Kamara in drafts right now.
Well, he's a massive value then, I think, if we get a full season out of him. Yeah, I do think that the video is the big thing here. And if it hasn't come out yet, I'm not sure it's gonna, at least publicly. So yeah, again, I think especially in these big tournaments where we're looking for upside, we're looking for guys that are gonna be league winners, especially down the stretch. I mean Kamara in round 3, after you can pair him with 2 other studs, I think that's very enticing to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the other thing is New Orleans looks like it wants to keep giving him the ball as much as it did last year because they didn't really add anything. Mark Ingram is still the number 2. Abram Smith is the big addition behind him, and he is an undrafted rookie. There is some support out there for Mark Ingram. And honestly, I think it's to a surprising level because after he came over from the Texans last season, he looked better than I expected when back with the Saints. But it's important to remember that with the 2020 Ravens, Mark Ingram ranked 3rd among their running backs in carries per game, also behind Lamar Jackson, 4th among Baltimore running backs in yards per carry that season. So just versus his teammates, he was far less effective than J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, even less effective than Justice Hill and Justice Hill's minimal exposure. 8 targets across 11 games for that team. So they weren't throwing him the ball at all. With last year's Texans, Ingram led the team in carries per game before moving back to New Orleans, but trailed Rex Burkhead and David Johnson in yards per carry. Also trailed those guys in receptions per game, averaged 3.4 yards per catch. Yards per catch, yards per carry with the Saints last year, also both below his career averages. So this is, if you like Mark Ingram here, if it's late enough, fine. But if you're getting yourself excited about him, I think this is a matter of some recency bias and some overrating the situation, because there's still room for the Saints to add a veteran before the season begins.
There is, and that'd be the issue for Ingram. I think the case for him now is he's a volume play if the depth chart remains the same, and if Kamara, gets that suspension, because, Ingram he had 2 healthy games last year with Alvin Kamara out. He had 14 carries and 4 catches in the first one, 16 carries and 6 catches in the second. We know he knows the offense. Again, there's just not much behind him right now. But I'm with you. I mean, there's not much left in Ingram's tank. He turns 33 in December. He wasn't very efficient in either team he played for last season. So I'm not super excited about him, but I see the case where, this is a guy who, you might get 6 games of, top 20 level volume, at least, even if he's going to be inefficient with it.
We'll talk about some of the guys around him in ADP, but I also think there would be less target share available to him if he were the starter this time around, because this is a team that's significantly upgraded at wide receiver and has Jameis Winston, who doesn't like throwing to running backs versus what other quarterbacks do. He would much rather throw it downfield, even if it means waiting until somebody wrecks his knee. Abram Smith, I mentioned in passing, but he's like the other guy to know about, and certainly don't overrate him. But interesting, he had 1 year of strong production at Baylor, where he kind of bounced between running back and linebacker before that final season. The team did have David Johnson in for a visit, hasn't signed him. So they're shopping the market. They're obviously not overly interested in what's available though right now.
They're probably waiting to get the Kamara news. I think if Kamara is suspended, they're gonna have to add something else to this backfield.
Most definitely. On the pass catching front, beyond the passes caught by the running backs, Michael Thomas is the biggest name. And of course, the question is, how good is the ankle? Jared, I think it's not especially encouraging that we're getting videos like that look like he's rehabbing it, like the 1-foot box jumps, the running routes on air. He had no OTAs, no mini camp this year. He's been out for a while. He missed all of last season and much of 2020 with that ankle injury. It's important to keep in mind that he's just now a little bit more than a year removed from surgery on that ankle, because he delayed that for a while, finally had it in June 2021. So just now he's getting past that 12-month mark from that particular recovery. Last time we saw him, career lows in yards per route run and catch rate. He was playing through a high ankle sprain at that point. Before that, of course, Michael Thomas was a monster.
He was, yeah, and a lot of that was volume based, and he had the awesome chemistry with Drew Brees. I mean, last time we saw Michael Thomas, Sean Payton was still the Saints head coach, and Drew Brees was still the Saints quarterback. Like that, that's how long it's been. And I don't know, the ankle stuff is scary. Again, there's a lot of turnover that he's going to be dealing with on this Saints team. But like, he's also cheap in drafts, and he was, the fantasy wide receiver 1 for a while there. He's not even 30 years old yet. So I get the upside. But man, he's been a tough name for me to click recently, at least, just because, there really hasn't been much positive news. Like we've heard, he should be ready for camp. He should be ready for week 1, but until we see him on the field, it's been tough for me to draft Michael Thomas.
Yeah, I think ADP is important here, but we'll leave that for a few minutes. We'll talk about the other guys that they've added. Jarvis Landry signed with them this offseason and late in free agency. I was surprised that he lingered on the market that long, even beyond the NFL draft. Jarvis Landry comes off 7 straight years of target shares over 23%. That's across 2 franchises, 25% plus in 3 of his 4 Cleveland seasons, over 26% in 3 of his 4 Miami seasons. Before last year, he had only missed 1 career game with injury. Longer average target depths in Cleveland than he had in Miami too. That included 2 years over 10 yards in ADOT. And that's especially worth noting now that Jameis Winston is his quarterback, because he does like to throw downfield.
Mm-hmm. And Landry isn't even 30 years old yet. So I like betting on a bounce back here. It is worth noting that you mentioned he lasted so long into free agency, and he signed just a 1-year, $3 million deal with the Saints. So I don't think there was a ton of interest for Landry on the open market. But again, this is such a tough wide receiver core to figure out, because if all these guys are healthy, it's crowded, and you have, Kamara in there commanding targets too. It's tough to get excited about any of these guys. But, if Michael Thomas isn't ready to go, then, Jarvis Landry could really be a big target share guy right out of the gate, because his other competition for targets is a rookie.
Yeah, and what we need is an extra motivated Jarvis Landry, who's already been collecting targets and multiple stops so far. And Jameis Winston's not a great quarterback, especially accuracy-wise, but his career completion rate, 61.2%, is very close to Baker Mayfield's 61.6%. So similar quarterbacks on that front to what Landry was working with in Cleveland. Chris Olave, the other big addition, the 11th overall pick. What was he, the third wide receiver off the board here?
And the Saints moved up 5 spots to take him 11th overall. So they obviously love this kid. Nice career at Ohio State. I mean, he spent 4 seasons there. His junior season was his best, 104 yards per game. That was across 7 games. That was the COVID shortened season. Olave, top 12 in the nation in both PFF receiving grade and yards per route run that season. Took a step back last year, which is slightly concerning for me. I mean, he had tough target competition with Garrett Wilson, who was a fellow first round pick, Jackson Smith and Jigba, who might be the first wide receiver off the board in next year's draft, and 3-year lows in PFF receiving grade and yards per route run for Olave last year. So that's the concern, but I still like him. I thought Olave was probably the most NFL ready wide receiver in this rookie class. I don't think his ceiling extends as high as a Drake London or a Treylon Burks or even a Garrett Wilson. But I do think he's ready to make an immediate impact. And again, there's definitely a chance he can do that in New Orleans, especially if Michael Thomas isn't ready to go.
Yeah, there's enough to like here long-term. Despite the step back last year, still went ahead of Jameson Williams, Jahan Dotson, and Treylon Burks in the NFL draft. His immediate outlook will depend pretty significantly on how Michael Thomas looks and what we can expect from Michael Thomas this season. I don't think there's really anything else worth noting at wide receiver. You can like Marquez Callaway if you want, but he's going to need somebody to get hurt or stay hurt in the case of Michael Thomas for him to find a spot. So I want to move on to tight end, because Adam Troutman, I think, is worth remembering at this point. He had a very disappointing second season, but it went basically as poorly as it possibly could for him. And it started in the offseason. He had surgery for a cyst, whatever a polondial cyst is. It basically stopped his training for a month. Then just as he was about to get back to it, he had appendicitis, which meant another surgery, another 3 weeks of not training. And he said, quote, "It was like a 7-week span where I couldn't do anything." And we mentioned that with Clyde Edwards-Helaire on the AFC West show, but that's the kind of thing that's easy to overlook when we get back to football, because it's not a knee injury that we're watching to see how his knee is. It's something that just kept him from training for basically 2 months and in his first full NFL offseason. So that's the time when a player should be like just learning how to prepare for an NFL season and getting in a full NFL offseason of preparation work. He missed that. Then after that stretch, he sprained an ankle in August, which slowed his start to the season, had an MCL sprain in November, which cost him 3 games, then had a positive COVID test, which cost him a 4th game. So basically, Adam Troutman had no chance to be worthwhile last year.
Yeah, exactly. And for the few games he was at least relatively healthy last season, he was getting the playing time he wanted. He was playing 80+% of the Saints offensive snaps. He was running pass routes on 70+% of the pass plays. So you like to see that. This was a guy that the Saints obviously love. Remember, this was the guy the Saints traded literally the rest of their draft for to move up in the 3rd round and take him back in 2020. Had a nice college career at Dayton. He was actually PFF's top receiving tight end in 2019. So still a prospect I'm interested in. The situation just isn't good, I don't think. I mean, this isn't going to be a super pass heavy offense. Quarterback play might be iffy, and then it's just so crowded at wide receiver and Kamara commanding targets. So, tough to really get Troutman to a good place, target projection wise, to really like him in fantasy. But he's cheap in drafts. He's tight end 39 in underdog ADP. So he's a guy I don't mind, if you're looking for a 3rd tight end with your very last pick, taking a shot on him, because I do think there's some receiving upside to Adam Troutman. It
was like the modified Ricky Williams trade to go get Adam Troutman at the end of that. Yeah, I think that he's interesting for best ball. I think he's interesting for tight end premium for FFPC, and we'll get to ADP in just a minute, but it's worth noting that the team does seem to like him. The tight ends coach calls him one of the better blocking tight ends in the league, and that doesn't help us for fantasy, but it does help a guy stay on the field, and it certainly helps a guy in the eyes of his coaches who ultimately control how much opportunity he gets. The coach also said he was starting to make the plays as a receiver that they expect him to make right before that November knee injury. So Troutman's going to be a guy for me to watch in the training camp reports to see what people are saying about him, what coaches are saying about him. But moving on to the overall ADP review, Jameis Winston is at QB 19 on Underdog. He's ahead of Matt Ryan, ahead of Daniel Jones, 2.5 rounds ahead of Ryan Tannehill, and a little less than a round behind Trevor Lawrence. So when you put him in that range and put the challenge of coming back from the knee injury, is there week to week ceiling for Jameis Winston? Yeah, but he's not going to be a standout guy for me in terms of even best ball value.
No, yeah, I mean, I don't like the value there. Quarterback 19. I think the argument for drafting Jameis Winston is, all these receivers are pretty cheap. I think, Alvin Kamara again in round 3 is a guy I like, so he is easily stackable. But in a vacuum at quarterback 19, that's I think higher than you should be going right now.
Yeah, I would definitely need 3 quarterbacks to be liking Winston on my roster. Alvin Kamara, RB 15, you mentioned. I think he's a smash pick there. The assault case, like I said, doesn't look like it's going to play out ahead of the season. So I think the biggest risk here is that at some point this video comes out like it did for Kareem Hunt, like it did for Ray Rice. Like that's the only thing I think at this point that's going to force NFL movement on this case.
Yeah, again, if we're talking these best ball, I mean, you can't draft scared in these best ball tournaments. The vast majority of your teams are going to lose. Are going to win nothing. So you got to just draft for the upside. And I think Kamara in round 3 could be a guy who is key to potentially winning one of these things.
And the closer we get to the season, I think the higher he's going to climb in ADP because people will start to believe that he's not going to be suspended, especially once we get past that court hearing in early August. I think that'll be a level where, we'll get reports like, oh, we had this hearing. It didn't really do anything in terms of advancing the case. It's just a procedural step. And people will be like, oh, I guess Alvin Kamara is going to be on the field week 1. I guess I should go back to drafting him.
Yep.
Mark Ingram up to RB 54, as I mentioned. If you want to take Mark Ingram in round 15, fine. But he's ahead of Marlon Mack, Jamal Williams, both Washington backups. He's 3 rounds ahead of Sony Michel. I don't think that Mark Ingram is better than Sony Michel straight up, either in terms of what we should expect play-wise or opportunity. So I would rather have Sony Michel, especially at their relative cost. And I would rather have all those other guys I mentioned than Mark Ingram.
Yeah, again, I get the case for Ingram, but he's not a guy I've been taking much. I mean, again, you need the Alvin Kamara suspension, I think, for Ingram to have a chance to pay off. And again, even in that case, I think New Orleans could and should add something else to that backfield that might threaten Ingram's lead job.
Yeah, I think even in the case that Alvin Kamara is not around for a significant stretch of games, at that point you get some help from Mark Ingram. You don't get league-winning upside.
Yep, agreed.
Wide receiver, Michael Thomas, wide receiver 39 on Underdog right now. Chris Olave, wide receiver 47. Jarvis Landry, wide receiver 59. I think all of those guys are going late enough to be justifiable. And I think as we transition from best ball to more lineup setting, I think Jarvis Landry is probably the best pick among those guys, especially in full PPR, just for what we can reasonably hope for, let's say, as opposed to project in terms of target share among them.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I said 2 minutes ago that you can't draft scared in these best ball tournaments. I mean, Michael Thomas at wide receiver 39, we could look back in 6 months and think that was ridiculous. Now, again, he might be close to a 0 if the ankle's still an issue or whatever it is. But he could also be a big profit at that price. So he's worth taking shots on. I'm gonna do though. I think Landry is the best pure value. I mean, he's not a best ball type of guy. Like I don't think he's going to be a big spike week player. Man, at wide receiver 59, I mean, just as you mentioned, the targets he's earned throughout his career, if he can even, be up near a 20% target share in New Orleans at wide receiver 59, he's a big value.
I think best ball tournament wise, I would still favor Michael Thomas most among the 3 because the ceiling is the highest. And at wide receiver 39, there's limited risk. I think if we're looking at like a full season best ball format where you're just competing against 11 other teams or so, they're all kind of even in that case because I think there's more risk with Michael Thomas. I think even though we don't like the spike week potential of Landry, I would probably take him first among the 3 in terms of value there. Chris Olave certainly has upside, but I think it really depends on Michael Thomas's status, plus how much target share he can get overall, because I'm not really sure what the target share outlook is there. Even if I'm not even sure he has 20% target share upside if Michael Thomas goes down at some point.
Right. Yeah. The thing I do like about Olave is we know Winston likes to throw deep, and Landry's not a downfield guy. Michael Thomas is not a downfield guy. Olave has that, 4.39 speed, and he was a good downfield wide receiver at Ohio State. So he does seem like a good fit with Jameis Winston.
And he might be the best ball tournament stack with Jameis Winston based on where those two are going. Adam Troutman, the only other guy I'll mention, tight end 39 on Underdog, so basically undrafted. Tight end 32 on FFPC. We have him at tight end 28, so it's not like we're excited about Adam Troutman, but obviously, he's just plainly a value pick, and we have him tight end 28 across those formats. Not a guy that we're expecting a lot from, but there are multiple paths to upside here. I think he has upside in target share potential. We really have no idea what kind of target share the Saints want to give him, because we have basically a new quarterback, basically a new coaching staff. You mentioned it's the same OC, but Sean Payton's gone, so we don't know how much of a difference that makes. There's a chance that the Saints just throw more in general because of the additions that they made at wide receiver, because of having Jameis Winston around for longer. There's a chance that Jameis Winston is closer to the Tampa Bay version of himself. So I think all of those avenues just add up to a why not upside for Adam Troutman as a tight end 3.
And again, if he's going to get the playing time he got last season, 80% of the snaps, 70% of the routes, getting that in the last round alone is worth it. I do think we should mention Taysom Hill. I think he's interesting. He's listed as a tight end on Underdog, which I think helps his value. I don't know what his role. I don't think he's going to be a real factor at tight end. But if he gets a few red zone targets, they could still use him in a gadget role too around the goal line. And then, what if Winston has a setback, gets hurt again? I don't know, maybe they decide to go with Taysom instead of Andy Dalton. There's paths for Taysom Hill. He's going in the 18th round on Underdog, and he's listed as a tight end. I'd like him as a third tight end. I just think if you can get 4 or 5 starting weeks out of him, which I think is definitely possible. Again, it doesn't take much tight end. If you score a touchdown, you're probably going to be a top 10, top 12 tight end for the week. And, Taysom can score touchdowns in a few different ways.
To me, Taysom Hill is only interesting in a best ball tournament as a tight end 3, where you have those week to week playoffs at the end. If it's full season counting, I'm not interested, but if it's week to week and we're looking for somebody who can give us a big week in the playoffs and be a difference there, then I'm interested. I don't think that he's a likely guy to give us 4 to 5 starting weeks, top 12 level tight end weeks. But, there is that big game potential because no other tight end has the chance to start at quarterback. Yeah. I still think Andy Dalton is going to be the backup, but what else do you have to say about Taysom Hill?
I was just thinking there's a little bit of Cordarrelle Patterson vibes with Taysom Hill. CPAT was a guy we were taking at the end of these Underdog drafts last year, not really knowing what his role is going to be. But and that worked out better than anyone could have imagined. I don't think Taysom Hill is going to have nearly that much value, but he's just interesting, and he's even a way to differentiate because he doesn't even get drafted in all of these Underdog drafts. So he might only be owned in 50% of these, which helps if you're at the end of these tournaments.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue for me is I don't think there's a path with a healthy Adam Troutman. I don't think there's a path for Taysom Hill to even be their number 1 tight end. And
I agree.
That makes Adam Troutman interesting to me. And the place that I've been especially interested is stacking Adam Troutman and Andy Dalton at the very end of the puppy superflex drafts, because both of those guys are on the board to the very end, to the point that they don't always get drafted. And Jameis Winston's got the knee. I mentioned historically QBs fare better than other positions in terms of coming back from those, but it's still a challenge. And any setback puts Andy Dalton into a lineup with those wide receivers that we mentioned. I think Andy Dalton has been maybe the most overlooked player at any position for the upside in those superflex tourneys.
Yeah, I haven't gotten into the superflex tourneys because I don't want to have to draft Andy Dalton. So I'm good.
That's
there.
The thing, though. Those are the different tournaments. People, we're still early in best ball tournament life. So when you go from that to this other format there's even less data out there. I mean, if we get to the end of the season, it's like, holy crap, Andy Dalton was the guy to own. I'm going to be sitting pretty, Jared. I'll buy you 7 beers.
Buy me a couple beers and an Andy Dalton jersey. I'll be happy.
We'll wrap things up with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and another big coaching change on this front. Bruce Arians is out as the head man. Who knows ultimately how much that had to do with any relationship with Tom Brady? They can say what they want. Really doesn't matter at this point because he's out. Todd Bowles moves from defensive coordinator to head coach, like we saw with New Orleans. OC Byron Leftwich is still around, got some head coach interviews, but he's still with the Bucs in that OC role. And he stays on top of an offense that finished third, and second in points the past 3 years with Leftwich as OC and Bruce Arians as head coach. Third, seventh, and second in yards. One of those years was with Jameis Winston before Tom Brady arrived for the last two. And I mean, it's worth. So we talked about Sean Payton leaving and not knowing how big a role he played. Mm-hmm. Bruce Arians brought Byron Leftwich with him from Arizona. So clearly he believes in Byron Leftwich. Tom Brady has talked up Byron Leftwich. And even if he needs consultation with Bruce Arians, Arians is still in the front office for the Bucs. So he's around if he needs to give a phone call. So I don't think there's any reason to expect any downgrade in this offense just from that particular factor.
No, and just like reading tea leaves, it does sound like, especially over the last couple seasons with Brady, that Leftwich has kind of been the man running the offense. I mean, Arians has a long history of, running solid offenses. I think he certainly had a part in it. But I'm not expecting much of a drop off, play calling wise, efficiency wise with Arians gone. I think Leftwich has kind of been the guy there.
This was the league's most pass-heavy offense last year. It was the third most pass-heavy offense the year before. It has trended toward more pass heaviness over the past few years. In neutral pass rate, they went from 8th in 2019 to 6th in 2020 to 3rd last year. Does that change with Tom Brady a year older, Rob Gronkowski supposedly retired, Chris Godwin facing a tough recovery from a knee injury? Maybe. But I'm not going to downgrade my expectation. I landed on 63.5% pass, 36.5% run, slightly down from 2021, but still high versus the rest of the league.
Yep, 63.5% pass for me, like that. And like this has been a fast-paced offense, 4th and 2nd in situation neutral pace. They were 4th in total offensive plays last year. So it's kind of everything you want out of a fantasy offense. Lots of plays, lots of passing.
Tom Brady led the league in passing yards per game at age 44. So not just, total passing yards, second highest passing yards per game of his career. First time at 300 plus passing yards per game since 2012. League high in attempts, completions, passing yards, touchdowns, highest completion rate since 2007, 6+% touchdown rate in each of his 2 Tampa seasons. Over the past 2 years, only Aaron Rodgers has more total touchdown passes. Brady has 8 more than number 3 Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, and he's finished 2nd in PFF passing grade in each of the last 2 seasons. And what is he now, like 55 years old or something? So there's been no drop off. There's been no drop off in his play. I mean, the concern, and I'm done like predicting a potential decline in Brady. I think he's going to just keep playing at a high level until he finally decides to retire. That's kind of what it feels like at this point. But the concern is Antonio Brown gone, Rob Gronkowski gone, at least for now. I mean, we can talk about Gronk. I still think there's some chance he ends up coming back at some point this season. But AB and Gronk combined for 25% of Brady's yards last season, 23% of Brady's touchdowns. And then on top of that, as you mentioned, we have Chris Godwin, who looks likely to miss at least the start of the season. He accounted for 20% of Brady's yards last season. So you have, nearly half of Brady's passing yards last season are not going to be on the field, at least to start this year.
Yeah. So we'll talk about how that works with his ADP in a few minutes, but moving on to running back now, they've got Leonard Fournette back. He hit the open market. He visited the Patriots, maybe among other teams, but he then re-signed for 3 years, $21 million, basically 2 guaranteed seasons for $12 million. Beats the 1-year contracts he had each of the past 2 years with the Bucs, $2 million, then $3.25 million. So clearly, after the year in which he emerged and took over the backfield from Ronald Jones, the team wants him to lead it again. What else you got on Leonard Fournette's last season before we move ahead to this year's outlook?
I mean, he was just awesome in real fantasy production, 4th in PPR points per game. In volume, he was 4th in expected PPR points per game. And really, he was even better. Remember, he started the season kind of in a timeshare with Ronald Jones the first 3 weeks. From weeks 4 to 14, before Fournette got hurt, he was 2nd in expected fantasy points per game. So just an awesome situation when you look at the touchdown opportunities in Tampa and then the pass catching opportunities. I mean, Tom Brady has always targeted his running backs at an above average rate, and that's continued with Fournette and these other Bucs running backs. And yeah, he returns to about the same situation. The question is Rachaad White, what type of role he's going to have as a rookie. But I just think Brady likes Leonard Fournette, and that just matters. I don't get into that stuff often when projecting, but we've seen, Brady wants someone he can trust back there, trust as a pass catcher, trust as a pass protector. That's kind of Fournette. So I think it's going to take a lot, I think, for Fournette to lose much work to this rookie coming in.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a bigger factor with Tom Brady than it is with others. And we look at what's around him. There's just not a reason to bet against Leonard Fournette keeping that same role. Now, the concern, I think, for Leonard Fournette, and it's easy to joke about, but it's definitely worth watching, as he hit minicamp at what he said was, quote, 240 something. So that sounds like high 240s to me, because I doubt that he really didn't know what it was. And that's 15 to 20 pounds over what he says the weight is that he plans to be playing at. I'm not saying it's time to worry yet, but it's not a good sign that he has not been clearly working out that hard so far in this offseason. And it's especially concerning when you talk about a guy who's had plenty of lower body injuries. Had a hamstring injury last year that put him on IR late in the season, ankle sprain twice in 2020, hamstring in 2018. Through his 5 seasons, he's played 63 of a possible 81 games, has had just 1 year where he didn't miss at least 3 games.
And as you mentioned, he just got paid, which we've seen guys kind of tail off after that happens. I don't know if you saw, there was a video, I think it was last week, of Fournette on a treadmill with a few other NFLers, and he still looked a little soft on that treadmill. So I don't know. We're gonna need a shirtless pick in like mid-August to make sure you're ready to go, because it's definitely something worth keeping an eye on once we get to training camp.
Yeah, I'm going to be more interested in his training camp picks than I will be in seeing more pictures of AJ Dillon's quads or any part of Saquon Barkley's body.
Yep, agreed.
You mentioned Rachaad White. He's definitely the most interesting second back in Tampa Bay. The competition's Keyshawn Vaughn, Gio Bernard. I like the upside on Rachaad White very easily over those guys. We'll see what happens in training camp, what we hear about where exactly guys are on the depth chart. But Rachaad White, a 3rd-round pick, was the 4th running back drafted this year. Only had 1 full season at Arizona State because of that 2020 COVID-shortened year. Was the lead back that year as well, but we only got 4 games, so tough to really gauge much from that. 5.5 yards per carry last year, 10.6 yards per catch, 21.7% share of the team receiving yards last season. That more than doubled the next highest share among all running backs in his draft class. So that's probably what we like the most just for his fantasy outlook, whether you're talking about long-term or this season, is that he's clearly at the high end of receiving among that class. Also then ran a 77th percentile 40-yard dash, 87th percentile burst score. So a guy that looked pretty good on tape, catches a lot of passes, and then tested well.
Yeah, exciting prospect. I was happy he got the 3rd-round draft capital. I wasn't, sure what the NFL thought about him with kind of that limited college resume. And yeah, I think it's a perfect fit. His receiving ability makes him a great fit in this Brady-led offense. Now, again, I don't think White is going to push Fournette for much work. So I don't expect White to be a standalone fantasy option. I do think he could be a league winner if Fournette goes down, because I think White would be the guy, maybe not taking over 100% of Fournette's workload, but he could take over 75% of it and, still probably score as a lower end RB1, at least as a strong RB2. So, when you're looking, he's going late enough in drafts, so you can get him in the RB40 range. He's a nice pick in these best ball tournaments, because again, if something happens to Fournette, White has that upside that we're looking for.
Yeah, I would say that he has more receiving upside in terms of efficiency and production. We'll see about targets than Fournette. Mm-hmm. I think he's probably a better pass catcher than Leonard Fournette is.
Yep, I agree.
Speaking of the team's other pass catchers now, well, let's start with Chris Godwin. Even though he's not close to the first guy in draft, he's kind of the, linchpin here or keystone or whatever. There's not much precedent for what we can expect from wide receivers in these late season ACL tears. I looked back among the wide receiver ACL tears, and it's mostly like summertime or early in the season. There have not been a lot of wide receivers, at least significant ones, that tore their ACLs late in the season. It was the very end of the year for Chris Godwin. 9-month recovery puts him in late September before he's, back to 100% just in terms of recovery from the surgery. So for me, it's tough to do anything in terms of setting up what to expect or even to whether to draft Chris Godwin until I know something about him being on the field and the team's expectations.
Yeah, torn right ACL and MCL for Godwin. He actually didn't have surgery until January 3rd. And, that I guess, I've been reading a bunch from, some of our doctor friends of what to expect. It's 9 months from surgery when these guys, it's kind of like their best case for when they could come back. So that puts Godwin at October 3rd. Week 5 kicks off on October 9th. So week 5 seems like the best case scenario for Godwin's debut. Now, the PUP list rules change this year. If you land on the reserve PUP list to start the season, you're out 4 games. So that's the 4 games Godwin would miss there. So I expect him to land on the PUP list. And so we'll know at that point he's out the first 4 games. And I think, again, week 5 is best case scenario. So that's obviously the downside with Godwin. You're going to be missing him for the first quarter of the season. And then, his production and efficiency is definitely in question coming off such a serious injury. The upside is, we're talking about a guy who was 8th in PPR points per game before his injury last season. He was 7th in expected fantasy points per game. He was top 10 among wide receivers and targets. And, that was with Antonio Brown and Rob Gronkowski on the field for a lot of that time. So I still think there's a chance. And again, my argument for Godwin has been taking him in these best ball tournaments when all the money's late in the season. And that's what matters most. Like if you can get a team to the end of these basketball tournaments and you have a Chris Godwin who at that point, should be close to 100%. That's kind of the upside, but I think he's definitely less attractive when we're talking about, standard home league, standard lineup setting leagues.
I'm still not that interested even in terms of best ball tournaments because I think 100% is 100% recovered from the surgery on his knee. I don't think it's fair to expect him to be 100% Chris Godwin at any point this season. How close he is to that, I have no idea. How much work he's getting and whether there are any setbacks once he does get back on the field, I have no idea. So I would just, even at the level, we'll talk about his ADP in a minute, but even at the level where he's going now, I'm more interested in other guys that are more known entities. All right, we'll move on to Mike. We'll move on to Mike Evans.
We've talked too much about Chris. I'm sick of talking about Chris Godwin. I know a lot of it's been behind the scenes, but
yeah, we got to bring some of it out from behind the curtain to let people know. So Mike Evans is healthy, could benefit from Chris Godwin being out. 2 seasons with Tom Brady so far, the 2 best touchdown rates of his career. And, this time of year, we always look at guys who are regression candidates for stuff like that when they have high touchdown rates. That's just who Mike Evans is. And I mean, we've seen times in the past where his touchdown rate regresses. That was also with Jameis Winston. The past 2 years, Mike Evans has tied for 6th, tied for 10th in end zone targets. He has ranked 4th and 1st in touchdowns on those end zone targets. Tom Brady has led the league in pass attempts from inside the 10-yard line each of the past 2 years, according to Pro Football Reference. So things are set up for Mike Evans to continue in that area that is the biggest driver for his fantasy point upside. The unknown, of course, here is whether his target share climbs significantly for the time that Chris Godwin's out, and maybe even when Chris Godwin's back, assuming that he's not quite back to peak Chris Godwin. That's the part that you don't know, and it's tough to project and can get dangerous to project. So I guess, Jared, the question is Mike Evans overrated right now in case he does stay at like 18 or 19% target share? Because he's going among guys that are in 24, 25 plus range.
Yeah, I mean, that's the crazy thing. He's finished wide receiver 11 and wide receiver 9 the last 2 seasons on 17.4 and 16.3% target shares. Those are like wide receiver 3 level target shares, and Evans has been scoring as a wide receiver 1 on them. Now, that's partly because the Bucs have thrown so much that, those target shares, it's a bigger pie he's drawing from, which helps. And then the touchdowns you mentioned have obviously helped the fantasy scoring. I think he's going to get a nice boost in target share. I think it's like, where else are these targets going to go? Unless you think, Russell Gage is going to, be soaking up 20+% of the targets, and Cameron Brate's going to be, seeing what Robert Gronkowski got at tight end. And Evans has big target share seasons. He has seasons of 24, 25, 29.5, and 30% target share seasons. It's going way back, before Chris Godwin was even there, but he's been a target hog before. He's good enough to be a target hog. I have him projected at 21% right now, which I still think is on the conservative side. And, that's projecting Godwin to come back, at the, closer end of that timeline we talked about. So I do not think Mike Evans is undervalued. I think he's a guy who, should be going in the second round and probably even, the first half of round 2 of fantasy drafts.
Yeah. Is there some risk? Sure. But I think it's appropriate that he's going where he is because he is capable of remaining that high efficiency guy with everything going on around him, including the quarterback that has been his guy for the past 2 years. Russell Gage was primarily a slot receiver with the Falcons, played primarily outside last year, though, for the Falcons team that lost Calvin Ridley for most of the year. The Bucs have touted his ability to play all 3 positions since signing him. And it sounds like Russell Gage will play primarily outside, taking over Antonio Brown's spot when and if Chris Godwin is healthy this season.
Yeah, which might not be ideal. I mean, he just looks and I think plays more like a slot receiver, but as you said, he has done it before. And it's just a great situation for Gage to be entering here, a pass heavy offense with Tom Brady, with the questions at wide receiver. I started the offseason out on Gage. You and the other DS guys have sort of brought me down on Chris Godwin, and that sort of forced me to add more, projected volume for Russell Gage. So I'm kind of good with where he's going in ADP right now. He's just improved every year. I mean, Gage was a 6th rounder in 2018, and he was really thought to be like a special teamer. But he's really improved as a receiver. His PFF grade has climbed each season. He was 30th among 89 qualifying receivers in PFF grade last season. He was 17th in yards per route run. And he was 17th in yards per route run on a bad Falcons passing game. I mean, compare that to his teammates. Calvin Ridley in his limited action last year was 61st in yards per route run. Olamide Zaccheaus was 82nd in yards per route run. So Gage has become a nice player. He got the nice contract from the Bucs, $20 million guaranteed. Tom Brady's been talking him up already, so he's set up to have a nice fantasy season. I'm no longer anti Russell Gage. I don't want to be anti Russell Gage.
The Bucs could have gotten Jarvis Landry for much less money. They probably could and still could sign Julio Jones for much less money, but they gave $10 million a year to Russell Gage. Clearly they like what he brings. And like you said, it's an excellent situation. This is also a situation in which we need to at least pay attention to who wins the 4th wide receiver spot. It's just not clear at this point. I wouldn't even want to bet money on any of them at a low rate. We've got Brashad Perriman, Cyril Grayson, Jalen Darden, Scotty Miller, Tyler Johnson. The last thing I read was Pewter Report saying that Brashad Perriman and Cyril Grayson are probably the leaders. Even that didn't seem like they were strongly behind anybody. I think this is a wide open competition. It's going to depend on how training camp goes.
Yeah, I've read that Scotty Miller might be the leader. I've read that Tyler Johnson is the leader, and also that Tyler Johnson is a cut candidate. So no one knows. I do think it's going to matter for probably just for as long as Chris Godwin is out, and that again I think it's pretty likely that's going to be at least the first 4 games of the season. So maybe deeper lineup setting leagues, DFS. I think whoever wins this number 3 job is going to be on the field a whole bunch for one of the best pass offenses in the NFL.
Yeah, either Scotty Miller or Brashad Perriman can be interesting. We'll see about the other guys. Cyril Grayson had he flashed last year briefly. Jalen Darden is more of a slot type, so we'll see exactly what the team wants and who they settle on. Scotty Miller is the most interesting to me right now, but again, I'm not going to bet heavily on any individual as it stands. Tight end, you mentioned Gronk. Who knows, especially in the same offseason where Tom Brady retired and unretired. It's the second time that Rob Gronkowski has retired. We could say whatever we want. We're all guessing on whether he'll come back or whether he's really done.
Yeah, and I think there's a chance he comes back, and if you believe that, I think he's still worth drafting at least some, like an underdog or FFPC with one of your last few picks. There's a chance you're taking zeros all season long, but most of your 18th round picks are going to be zeros, or at least not starting for you most of the season. And Gronk, still, I think if he comes back, he's still a top 12 fantasy tight end.
I would be more interested in taking late Gronk if we couldn't get David Njoku at tight end 19, Evan Engram at tight end 23. There's enough value down there that I'm okay with basically not drafting, and we'll see what happens. It's possible that I end up regretting it, but I would be, I guess, most interested in considering if I already have Tom Brady rostered.
Yes, for sure.
Cameron Brate is the ostensible replacement, especially if you look at ADP, but he's coming off a career low 52.6% catch rate last year. That, of course, followed a career high in his first year with Tom Brady. Career low yards per target last season. He has also more significantly played less than 40% snap share in 3 straight seasons. He's had 4 straight years under 40%. Only 2 of those years came with Gronk on the team, and last year Gronk missed 5 games. So there's been time for Cameron Brate to play more, and the Bucs have not played him more. So I don't think that they really like him that much. I think he's a role player regardless of what's around him. That role is near the goal line, so it's good for fantasy points per route run, but I don't think that there's really a chance that Cameron Brate is a breakout value this year, even if we get no Gronk all season.
Well, like you said, Gronk missed 5 games last season. In Brate's defense, OJ Howard did play all 5 of those games, so he was splitting time with OJ Howard. But Brate did nothing in those 5 games without Gronkowski. 2 catches, 29 yards on 6 targets, 1 catch on 1 target for 12 yards, 3 catches for 26 yards on 4 targets, 0 catches on 4 targets, and 1 catch for 6 yards and a touchdown on 3 targets. So I don't see it with Brady. I think he's a well below average player at this point. The Bucs did add Cade Otton in the 4th round of this year's draft. I think he could push Brate for playing time, especially over the second half of the year.
Yeah, and breaking through Brate's defense, the team also let OJ Howard walk for a 1-year, $3 million contract in the offseason. So clearly they weren't loving that version of OJ Howard. In addition to Cade Otton, they've talked up O'Keefe a little bit, who is a 6th-round rookie. Both are day 3 picks. I'm just not interested in this position if Gronk is not playing. So we'll move on to the ADP review. And Tom Brady's QB 10, which I think is fair. QB 2, QB 7 the past 2 years. He's had plenty of spike weeks. You mentioned the concerns, and I share them, but I think they are baked into his QB 10 price. I do think that Tom Brady is more important to stack than some of the running quarterbacks that are in consideration there. I wouldn't want naked Tom Brady in my best ball turning lineup.
Yeah, and I do like the way you can stack Brady. I think it's pretty easy. Again, I don't want anything to do with the tight ends. I think Fournette I think you can stack Brady and Fournette. I think, Fournette does enough in the passing game where there's nice correlation there. And then again, I think Mike Evans, I like him at wide receiver 7. I still like Chris Godwin at wide receiver 30, Russell Gage, wide receiver 35. It's, it's still a fairly concentrated offense where, you can stack up Brady pretty easily.
Leonard Fournette's RB11. He's up a little in FFPC drafts since just after re-signing with the Bucs, but has held pretty steady in that range. Mid-round 2 in that format. Also RB11 on that site, both there and on Underdog. I'm not currently drafting much of Fournette because I want to see where this weight thing goes. And there are guys around him. Saquon Barkley's still right on either side of him, and I easily prefer Saquon Barkley straight up.
Yeah, I prefer Barkley too. We need that shirtless pick, Lenny. I will say, so we get Bucs Panthers week 17. So if you're looking, correlate an Underdog, I've been able to get McCaffrey and Fournette on some teams, and I definitely like that start.
Yeah, that would be where I'm most interested. We also have in the same range Alvin Kamara going after him, James Conner going after him. So, similar guys in terms of expected workload. It makes it easier for me to not be excited about Fournette. Rachaad White, RB42. I think it's a fair range. He's just behind Ronald Jones and Dameon Pierce. He's just ahead of Isaiah Spiller, Naheem Hines, Darrell Henderson, and Michael Carter.
Yeah, I like White as a target. He's a guy I'm really trying to leave a lot of these drafts with either Fournette or Rachaad White. I just think this backfield is such a great spot for fantasy production. I think, Fournette we've seen is a good fit in the offense. White, I think, projects as a good fit in the offense. If something happens to Fournette, again, I think White has that upside to really be a league winner, as a 10th or 11th round pick.
Wide receivers, Mike Evans at wide receiver 7, first half of round 2. Like we said, kind of where he belongs. Chris Godwin down to wide receiver 30, Russell Gage up to wide receiver 35.
Yeah, Godwin's ADP keeps dropping, and I can't stay away from him again. I think he could be a wide receiver 1 over the second half of the season. And if I can get that, especially in these best ball tournaments in the 6th, 7th round, that's a guy I'm going to take a shot on.
We shall see. Cameron Brate is up to tight end 23, tight end 25. in FFPC best ball drafting, tight end 23 in Football Guys Players Championship drafts on there so far. I think that's where he makes the most sense, where you have lineup setting and you have waivers. So you can draft Cameron Brate as a reserve, see what happens, see if Gronk is back, see if they add any veterans. And then you can drop him for something else. I'm still never going to be targeting him because you basically have to choose him over Evan Ingram and David Njoku on Underdog right now. And that's a huge no thanks for me.
Yeah, I'm not doing that either. I can't really hate on Brate at tight end 23 though. I mean, he could stumble his way into 6-7 touchdowns just being on the field in this offense. So he's fine. Just really not for me.
That's going to do it for this third installment of the divisional preview series. You can check out the previous ones on draftsharks.com or wherever you get your podcasts. For Jared Smola and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Shop saying thanks so much for swimming with us.